There are shadows in the world that no amount of sunlight can banish, places where the veil between what is and what was grows dangerously thin. The summer I turned 16, my father, Alaric, decided we would embark on what he called an expedition of origin. He wasn't some grizzled survivalist or an ex-military type, just a quiet, unassuming man, an anthropologist by profession, whose life had been consumed by the study of forgotten cultures and lost civilizations. His office at home wasn't filled with awards or accolades, but with ancient maps, brittle journals, and dusty tomes, all whispering of places untouched by modern man, places where the very bedrock held secrets older than human memory. For years, he'd been especially fixated on tales from the deepest reaches of the Alaskan interior, not merely for their anthropological significance, but for something he hinted at as a deeper truth. He spoke of a primordial pulse, a resonance that he believed still beat in those untouched corners of the earth. Modern life, he claimed, had dulled our senses, softened our spirits, and severed our connection to the raw, untamed essence of existence. This journey, he insisted, would strip away that artificial veneer, leaving only the fundamental self. His eyes, usually so practical and grounded in academic research, held a glint of almost feverish zeal, a spark of obsession that unnerved me even then. I was Kalen, 16, all gangly limbs and burgeoning anxieties, utterly unprepared for anything beyond the well-worn paths of suburban life. My father's pronouncements were typically met with a practiced blend of dutiful nods and internal eye-rolls. But the idea of 2 months in the Alaskan wilderness, miles from any hint of humanity, was more than daunting. It was a vast, terrifying unknown. Yet there was also a sliver of romantic appeal in his descriptions and immersion. He called it a communion with the last true wild. I envisioned soaring peaks, rivers so clear you could see every pebble on their beds, perhaps a majestic moose or a powerful bear from a very safe distance. I certainly didn't imagine the chilling, insidious reality that would unfold. Our journey began with a series of diminishing returns. First, a long, grinding train ride up the Pacific coast, the rhythmic click-clack of the rails, a gradually fading heartbeat of civilization. Each mile took us further from the familiar, deeper into the vastness that seemed to stretch infinitely on either side. Seattle became a blurred memory, then a distant concept. Next, a prop plane lifted us over a sea of jagged, snow-capped teeth that tore at the sky for hours, their silent majesty both inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. The air grew thin, crisp, and carried a primal chill that seeped into my bones. Finally, a tiny, single-engine bush plane, its engine buzzing like an angry hornet, deposited us on a remote gravel strip that barely qualified as a runway. The air here was different, sharper, infused with the overwhelming scent of pine and damp earth, a wildness that tasted metallic on my tongue. A weather-beaten local with eyes that seemed to have seen too much picked us up in a battered pickup truck, rattling us the last few miles to a scattering of log cabins, a makeshift trading post, and a single, silent saloon. It was less a village and more a punctuation mark at the very end of the known world, a last, desperate sigh of human presence before the true wilderness swallowed everything whole. I stood on that dusty road, dwarfed by the towering spruce and fir, the immense, untamed expanse pressing in from all sides. A strange, profound quiet hung in the air, a silence so deep it hummed, occasionally broken by the rustle of unseen things in the distant underbrush. This was it, the true departure, Alaric, with a homemade map clutched in his hand, a piece of parchment adorned with faded ink and cryptic symbols that looked less like topography and more like ancient script, led us deeper. We plunged into the dense forest, the ancient trees swallowing the last echo of the bush plane's engine. Our heavy packs, laden with gear, dug relentlessly into our shoulders. Alaric navigated with an almost supernatural instinct, following what appeared to be an old animal trail, but one that seemed too deliberately winding, too perfectly formed for mere beasts. We climbed rugged slopes, picked our way through thorny thickets, sweat stinging my eyes and a dull ache settling deep in my muscles. Alaric, though, was in his element. He breathed deep, his chest expanding with each inhale, his eyes alight with an almost manic energy as he pointed out obscure mosses, the faint, almost indistinguishable tracks of creatures I'd never heard of, and rock formations he claimed resonated with a peculiar energy. He seemed to vibrate with a strange excitement, as if he were home. I meanwhile just tried not to twist an ankle, my mind already weary, struggling to reconcile this fervent, almost wild man with the quiet academic I knew hours blurred into an exhausting ascent, the trail winding higher and higher into the forested foothills, the air growing colder with every foot of elevation gained. Just as my legs threatened to give out, screaming for rest, we reached a small clearing along a rushing, glacial river, its waters a furious milky blue-gray. "Here," Alaric declared, his voice ringing with a satisfaction that bordered on reverence as he dropped his pack. "The heart of it, the nexus." I gratefully shrugged off my own burden, letting it thump to the ground, and gulped water from the frigid stream, the cold biting at my throat. The air here was colder still, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ancient stone or something long buried. After a short break, we set to work. Alaric directed me to gather fallen logs for a crude shelter, while he assembled our canvas tent and built a meticulous fire pit, arranging the stones with an almost ritualistic precision. By the time the first stars pierced the rapidly darkening twilight, a meager, almost fragile camp had taken shape. We wolfed down rehydrated beans and rice, watching the jagged silhouettes of the mountains swallow the last light. My body screamed for rest, every muscle an insistent ache, but Alaric seemed energized, almost buzzing, his gaze fixed on the dazzling canopy of stars above, occasionally sweeping the silent tree line as if searching for something unseen. As I drifted off to sleep, curled in my sleeping bag, he remained outside, a silent, watchful figure, a silhouette against the dying embers. The next morning, Alaric was already up, stoking the fire, the aroma of pine smoke filling the crisp air. "Time for education, Kalen," he said, his eyes bright with that disturbing zeal. He taught me how to set snares not just for food, he stressed, but with an almost ritualistic precision, as if each knot, each placement, held a deeper meaning. He showed me how to prep game, not just to eat, but to honor the bounty, his words echoing strangely in the vast silence. He taught me to tan hides, to filter water from the glacial stream, to forage for edibles, his lessons punctuated with almost mystical pronouncements about the land providing, about listening to the whispers of the ancient earth. My city hands fumbled, often clumsy and slow, but I tried to absorb it all, eager to please and perhaps, in some small way, to understand this side of my father. He also gave me lessons in tracking, not just animals, but patterns, anomalies in the undergrowth, disturbances in the flow of the wild. He taught me how to read the subtle shifts in the weather, how to identify different tree barks, and how to avoid bears, though his animated lectures seemed to gloss over real dangers in favor of a deeper, more esoteric understanding of the wilderness, as if the physical threats were merely distractions from a grander, hidden narrative. He was in his absolute element, a man transformed, while I was utterly out of mine, a growing frustration gnawing at me as the days bled into weeks, each one a relentless cycle of physical exertion and bewildering spiritual lessons. My body ached perpetually from the endless tasks. Hauling wood, smoking the small fish we managed to catch, mending torn gear with clumsy stitches. My fingers were calloused, my skin perpetually grimy, scratched, and perpetually chilled. Alaric insisted it was forging me, shaping me into something stronger, more authentic, more connected. But cold, perpetually hungry, and bone-tired, I often felt like a lost, small boy, far from the concrete comfort of home. Yet I persevered, not wanting to disappoint the fierce, almost desperate hope I saw in my father's eyes, that hope that glimmered with something beyond mere paternal pride. Then came the first undeniable sign that something was truly amiss, something that burrowed deep into my subconscious and began to fester. One morning we woke to find our cache of smoked salmon, carefully suspended high in a tree, ravaged. Giant paw prints, unnervingly large and distinctly malformed, surrounded the shredded remains. Grisly, Alaric surmised, his tone calm, almost detached, but I saw the flicker of something else in his eyes, a deeper, colder concern. It wasn't just a bear, I sensed, but something that had found us, something that had known exactly where to look, a malicious intelligence in its precise destruction. We redoubled our precautions, suspending food even higher, stringing bells and noisemakers around the camp perimeter, creating a crude, fragile barrier against the unseen. But the feeling of being watched, of being known, remained. A week later, the intruder returned, bolder this time. I heard Alaric's low curses before I even poked my head from the tent. Our food bags and cooler lay in a heap, contents scattered, the heavy aluminum cooler lid bent and torn open with impossible force. Alaric's face was grim, a fury that was almost cold as he examined the footprints in the damp earth. They were enormous, vaguely human-like, yet grotesquely misshapen, with an extra vestigial toe that pressed deep into the mud, leaving a disturbingly clear imprint. My blood ran cold. This was no ordinary bear. Some massive, intelligent creature was roaming just beyond the tree line, watching us, learning us, and now it was toying with us. Alaric squeezed my shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm, telling me not to worry, that he would protect us, but his jaw stayed clenched all day as he paced the perimeter of the camp, his rifle held close at hand, his gaze constantly sweeping the silent, oppressive forest. That night sleep was impossible. My mind conjured vivid, terrifying images of the creature, lurking, waiting, its malformed feet pressing into the earth. A primal sense whispered that this was not just an animal, but something else, something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for us, for Alaric. As exhaustion finally claimed me near dawn, a fitful, haunted sleep, I heard the soft, rhythmic click of Alaric cleaning and re-cleaning his rifle outside the tent, a sound that, paradoxically, offered no comfort at all, only deepened the dread. The next morning, I woke feeling groggy, disoriented, and chilled to the bone. Sunlight filtered through the tent roof, an impossible sight. Alaric should have woken me hours ago, roused me with his usual almost manic energy. I scrambled out, yelling for him, my voice cracking, thin and reedy in the overwhelming silence. The camp was eerily still, the fire nothing but cold ashes, the air heavy with an absence that screamed wrongness. I searched every inch, every nook and cranny, but found only his rifle, leaning against a tree, its stock still damp with dew, as if he had simply set it down and walked away. My heart sank, a leaden weight in my chest. I was alone. Something terrible, something unthinkable had happened while I slept, oblivious. "Dad!" I screamed desperately into the vast, indifferent forest until my voice was raw, until my throat burned, but only the wind, a cold, mocking whisper, answered. Then I saw them. The monstrous footprints, surrounding my tent, far bigger than any man's, bearing that same, unnatural extra toe, pressed deep into the soft earth. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching fear, as I sprinted blindly between the ancient trees, calling for Alaric, my voice hoarse with panic. The echo of my own screams the only sound in the terrifying silence. It had been 2 days since my father mysteriously vanished from our camp, swallowed by the immense, ancient Alaskan wilderness. 2 days of frantic, futile searching, of circling our small, isolated clearing, hope eroding with every passing hour. I knew I had to act fast if I had any hope of finding him alive. Despite having no clear trail to follow, and my scant, clumsily learned survival skills feeling utterly inadequate, I plunged recklessly into the sprawling, suffocating forest. Low-hanging branches whipped my face and arms as I crashed through the underbrush, desperate shouts of "Dad! Can you hear me?" swallowed by the deafening silence of the woods, a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a profound, watchful presence. I slowed, gasping for breath, my hands shaking with a cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and sheer exhaustion. "Get it together, Kalen," I told myself, my inner voice a desperate whisper. "Freaking out won't save him. Freaking out will get you killed." I forced myself to stop, to stand utterly still, to listen with every fiber of my being. Perhaps he was yelling for help somewhere nearby, perhaps a faint cry would pierce the silence. But all I heard was the wind rustling through the ancient trees, a sound that suddenly felt alive, watchful, as if the forest itself were a conscious entity, observing my pathetic struggle. I urged myself, squeezing my eyes shut for a fleeting second, trying to recall any of Alaric's countless tracking tips, his esoteric lessons. Look for broken twigs, disturbed soil, anything that seemed out of place, any unnatural disruption in the chaotic symphony of the forest floor. I opened my eyes and scanned the ground, my vision blurring from exhaustion and unshed tears, my eyes burning with desperate urgency, searching for a single, undeniable sign he had passed this way. At first, there was nothing but a chaotic tapestry of leaf litter, decaying wood, and vibrant fungi. Then, a faint boot print, clear and unmistakable in a patch of soft, dark mud. It was headed downstream, towards a small creek. Hope, fragile but fiercely tenacious, surged through me, a desperate ember in the vast cold. I hurried to follow the trail, more prints appearing periodically along the creek's mossy banks, each one a fragile lifeline. My pace quickened, my gaze fixed on the ground, searching for any other clues, any other confirmation. Crossing the icy creek made the trail vanish momentarily, the rushing water obliterating the prints, sending a wave of panic through me. But then there it was, a scrap of Alaric's red flannel shirt snagged on a fallen log, its familiar plaid a beacon in the overwhelming green, a splash of color against the monotony of the forest. I must be close. Hold on, Dad. I'm coming, I yelled, my voice raw and hoarse, the words echoing off the ancient rocks, a desperate plea to the empty air. I was halfway up the side of a ravine now, following the creek higher into the hills, the water a distant murmur below. My thighs burned with every step, and I slipped often on the damp leaves and slick rocks, but I couldn't slow down, couldn't afford to rest. I had to find him today, or I shook off the thought, a cold tendril of dread that threatened to paralyze me, and called his name again. Maybe this time he would answer, a real voice, not just the mocking wind. But only the piercing shriek of a hawk replied, a sound that felt more like a warning than a greeting, more like a lament. I kept climbing until I reached a tumbling waterfall, its icy spray misting my face as it spilled into a clear, dark pool. I stopped, hands cupped around my mouth. Can you hear me, Dad? Why wouldn't he respond? Was he no, he has to be okay. The trail seemed to disappear by the waterfall, lost in the slick rock face, the water's roar drowning out any other sound. I frantically looked around, my mind racing, desperate for where to go next. Then I noticed a rocky outcrop jutting above the pool. Was that a handprint, a faint smudge of mud, an impression of fingers, too large to be mine, too distinct to be natural? I edged out along the outcrop to examine it. Yes, a muddy handprint, Alaric's for sure. He must have climbed up this ledge, a desperate climb for him, for me. With renewed motivation, a jolt of desperate energy, I inched around the falls and up the slick, moss-covered rocks. Don't look down, I told myself, my voice a shaky whisper, focusing on any potential handholds, any small purchase on the unforgiving rock. I reached a small plateau, finally, where I could rest a minute, my chest heaving, my muscles screaming. No more signs of Alaric, but I must be gaining on him. I had to be. Catching my breath, my vision still swimming, I gazed across the ravine to the opposite ridge. Something caught my eye near the tree line. Was that Alaric waving his arms? I see you, I yelled, excitement making my voice hoarse, a desperate cry of hope. But he didn't react, didn't turn, just kept waving, erratically, almost unnaturally, a strange, jerking movement that sent a shiver down my spine. I shaded my eyes with a trembling hand, studying this bizarre, mechanical gesture. Was that even a person, or some swaying branches, a cruel trick of the fading light, a mirage born of desperation? Cold, crushing disappointment washed over me, heavier than any physical burden. It had to be a mirage, my mind playing cruel, sadistic jokes. Despair, thick and suffocating, overwhelmed me, and I realized I'd lost the trail again, wasted precious time chasing phantoms, chasing ghosts in the wilderness. Hot tears, bitter and cold, rolled down my cheeks. I just wanted to curl up on the rocks and give up, surrender to the crushing weight of the wilderness. But I couldn't let Alaric down. He'd keep searching relentlessly if it were me lost out here. He always said, never give up, Kalen, not until the last breath. Wiping my eyes roughly with a grimy sleeve, I resolved to keep going, even though I was reaching my absolute physical limits, every muscle screaming in protest. I managed to inch my way back around the falls and continue downstream, scanning desperately for any subtle signs of passage, any broken twig, any displaced stone. The day was fading, the sky bleeding from gray to bruised purple, but I wouldn't let darkness stop this search. I just hoped I was going in the right direction, hoped I wasn't compounding my mistakes. My range of vision narrowed as the sun sank below the ridgeline, painting the western sky with a brief, fiery glow before plunging into the cold blackness. I kept my eyes glued to the ground, terrified of missing some vital clue in the growing gloom. Would Alaric survive another frigid night out here alone, perhaps wounded, at the mercy of whatever creature stalked these woods? I was so focused on searching for tracks, my head down, my gaze fixed on the darkening earth, that I didn't see the fallen log spanning the creek up ahead, slippery with moss. My shin cracked against it painfully, sending a blinding jolt of agony up my leg, and I sprawled headlong into the icy water. The current tugged viciously at my soaked clothes as I struggled to stand, jagged rocks slicing my hands as I crawled back to shore, gasping. Exhausted, shivering uncontrollably, I collapsed onto the muddy bank, the cold seeping into my bones. Through chattering teeth, I scanned the darkening woods, praying Alaric would suddenly emerge, a spectral figure from the shadows. But I knew that was just a fantasy, a desperate, childish hope. He was still lost out there, and now so was I, and I was in no shape to keep going, utterly defeated, every fiber of my being screaming in protest. I dragged myself back up the faint trail, using trees for support, leaning against their rough bark for momentary respite. My soaked clothes clung coldly to my skin as night fell and temperatures plummeted. I kept blacking out, stumbling, my vision swimming, but somehow, driven by some primal instinct, I made out the faint, flickering glow of our campfire through the trees. Somehow, miraculously, I had wandered in a giant circle today, a futile, exhausting loop. Alaric was still nowhere to be found. I sank down by the flames, every fiber of me screaming in pain and sorrow, my body a leaden weight. But I couldn't give up, not yet. At dawn's first light, I would search again. The warmth from the crackling flames slowly revived my battered, shivering body. As I sat there, wrapped tightly in a thin blanket, I methodically cleaned and dressed my many cuts and scrapes using the meager first aid kit. Spraining my ankle crossing that icy creek earlier didn't help matters, a dull throb that radiated up my leg. But I just gritted my teeth and tightly wrapped it with an ace bandage, trying to ignore the pain. Once I'd patched myself up, I gingerly hobbled around camp, taking stock of our remaining supplies. The situation wasn't promising. Alaric's absence meant it was all up to me now to provide food, mend damaged gear, and maintain the fire, the last bastion of warmth and safety in this terrifying wilderness. Can I survive solo out here? Doubt and despair, cold and insidious, crept back in as I surveyed our meager camp, the silence pressing in. But moping wouldn't make Alaric magically reappear, wouldn't fill the gnawing emptiness in my stomach or the chilling emptiness in my soul. I shoved the fears aside, forcing them back into the dark corners of my mind, and focused on tasks that might boost my chances. Gathering more firewood, preparing some trout I'd managed to catch earlier in a lucky throw of the net, and refilling our water stores. Keeping busy, moving, doing, somehow steadied my nerves and boosted my morale a little, but it still felt like I was just biding time, playing a grim game of solitaire until Alaric came hiking back into view, a miracle of survival. Please let it be soon. The fish, though small and bony, helped strengthen and warm me after that brutal day of hiking. As I gnawed the last fatty morsels off the bone, my mind drifted to Alaric, still out there, hungry and shivering, perhaps injured. Was he managing to find any food or shelter? No, I couldn't go down that road. Had to stay positive. He's alive. He has to be. I tossed the picked bones into the fire. Sparks danced up towards the vast, inky blackness of the sky, which glowed brilliantly with 1,000 stars, a distant, indifferent cosmic show. Then I heard it. The long, lonely howl of a wolf echoed across the valley, a mournful primal sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Something about its cry felt too close, too personal. It was answered by another wolf, closer this time, and then another. I instinctively scooted nearer the flames, stoking them with a stick, trying to make the fire larger, a bigger beacon of warmth and safety. I knew wolves usually avoided humans, but being alone now, truly alone, I couldn't help feeling scared, a raw, naked fear. More howls joined in, a growing chorus all around, making the forest seem to close in on me, the trees themselves shifting into menacing silhouettes. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. In the morning I'll search again, no matter what. If the wolves find Dad first, no, I can't think about that. He only had a day head start, so he can't be far. As the moon, a sliver of silver, rose overhead, I stared into the swirling flames, imagining they were a campfire keeping Alaric warm somewhere out there. A desperate, fragile connection across the vast, terrifying wilderness. Today was another long, difficult day with no sign of Alaric. My ankle throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, my back ached from days of exertion and restless sleep, and my morale was sinking steadily, a heavy stone in my stomach, but I had to keep trying. I clung to the slim hope that maybe he had left clues or signs for me in our traps, a breadcrumb trail in this endless forest. As I checked each empty snare along the trail, my heart sank deeper, each empty trap a fresh stab of disappointment. Then I arrived at the final snare near the creek and saw that the rabbit I'd caught yesterday was gone. Hope flickered back to life, a fragile spark. Alaric must have taken it to survive another day. He had to be here, somewhere close. My eyes scoured the area, looking for any other evidence he passed by, any disturbed leaf, any broken twig. "I'm on the right track," I yelled out excitedly, my voice hoarse, desperate. "Just hang on, Dad. I'm going to find you." I gathered the scattered branches of the disassembled trap, wanting to be methodical, not to miss anything, however small. As I was rebuilding it, arranging the twigs and twine with trembling fingers, I noticed some scratched marks on a nearby tree trunk, partially obscured by moss. I rushed over to inspect them, my heart thumping. Is it a message from Alaric? I ran my fingers over the rough letters carved into the bark. They weren't letters I knew, not simple alphabet characters. They were symbols, stark and angular, reminiscent of the cryptic markings on Alaric's own map, the faded ink and strange figures that seemed to speak of an older language. I recognized one, a symbol Alaric had shown me in his journal, a jagged mark he called the Wayfinder. Yes, it has to be a sign left for me, a desperate message. My heart swelled with a fresh surge of determination, knowing I was on the right path, following the unseen thread of his struggle. I just had to keep following it along the creek. The morning sun, a pale, watery light, filtered through the thick canopy of trees as I stirred awake, my body stiff and sore from another night sleeping on the hard, cold ground. As I poked at the dying campfire, sending a few embers into the gray air, and began boiling water for my morning tea, a thin tendril of smoke on the distant ridge caught my eye. I froze, kettle in hand, staring at the gray smoke wisping above the treetops, a fragile column against the vast sky. There was no mistaking it for a natural forest fire with the way it billowed in contained puffs, as if someone was sending a deliberate smoke signal, a cry for help. But who could be out here signaling in the remote wilderness besides Alaric? My heart leaped, a desperate, frantic drumbeat. It had to be him. It had to be. Hands shaking with a fresh surge of adrenaline, I scrambled to pack up a small day bag with some supplies, a few jerky strips, a compass, my hunting knife. I doused the fire, carefully scattering the cold ashes, and slopped some more tea into my thermos before hurriedly setting out toward the smoke. As I crashed through the underbrush, my throat raw, I shouted anxiously, "Don't worry, Dad. I'm coming." The smoke looked several miles away across rugged terrain, but I was determined to reach it as fast as possible, driven by a renewed, desperate hope. I clambered up steep wooded slopes, my legs burning, then cautiously picked my way down loose shale on the other side, sending small avalanches of rock tumbling behind me. Heavy branches whipped across my face as I forced my way through thickets choked with alder and devil's club, their thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. I slipped often on the damp tundra, my sprained ankle protesting with every jarring step, but I kept staggering onward, fueled by a singular focus. That column of smoke was my only tether of hope, my only proof that Alaric was still alive out here somewhere, still fighting. As the day wore on, however, the smoke started dissipating against the dreary, leaden-gray sky, thinning, fading, becoming ephemeral. I panicked, a cold knot forming in my stomach, quickening my aching pace as much as possible, pushing past the pain. But by the time I reached the ridge where it originated, there was nothing left but a faint, acrid whiff of burnt wood clinging to the air, a cruel, mocking scent. "No, no, no," I cried in anguish, the sound raw and torn from my throat, frantically searching the area for any other sign of Alaric. But the ground showed no footprints, no fresh campfire remains, just flattened grass where perhaps someone had been signaling hours ago, a fleeting trace of hope. Exhausted, heartsick, and utterly defeated, I collapsed to my knees, the strength draining from my limbs. It was like losing Alaric all over again, each failed attempt a fresh wave of grief. He must have given up waiting and moved on, and now I'd wasted precious daylight chasing smoke through the endless, indifferent wilderness as tears stung my eyes, cold and bitter. It really sank in how utterly, terrifyingly alone I was out here. If I didn't find Alaric soon, I would be next. I shook off that thought, forcing it down, trying to regain control. I couldn't let hopelessness take root, or I'd be as good as dead. I had to keep believing we'd be reunited, that there was a reason for all this, a purpose. Wiping my eyes roughly, I gathered my resolve and took one last, desperate look around. Maybe Alaric left some other clue about where he was heading, a more permanent mark. I noticed a faint game trail winding down the backside of the ridge, barely visible against the encroaching shadows. That could be a good starting point tomorrow. But for now, I needed to get back to my camp before nightfall, before the deeper terrors of the Alaskan night fully awoke. The hike back seemed to take twice as long, each step in agony, exhausted as I was. I slipped often on the damp moss and tangled roots, too weary to stop again, too afraid of what I might find if I paused. I sipped cold tea and chewed on a piece of jerky as I walked, replaying the morning's crushing disappointment in my head. Where do I search next? Will Alaric leave another signal for me, or will the creature hunting him snuff his life out first, just as it had intended to do to me? By the time my small campfire came into view, a flickering orange against the encroaching darkness, it was nearly night. I numbly kicked together a fire, too tired for dinner, too numb to feel hungry, as I huddled close to the flames, fighting off the despair about my vanishing father, about my own bleak prospects. The surrounding woods suddenly erupted in chilling howls, closer this time, more insistent. Wolves. It was going to be another long, sleepless night, spent staring into the flames, imagining eyes in the darkness beyond. The next morning, I was shaken awake at sunrise by a horrific scream echoing from somewhere deep in the forest. A sound of pure, unadulterated agony that tore through the pre-dawn stillness. I lurched up, heart hammering against my ribs, instantly awake, every nerve alight. The anguished screaming went on, a raw, primal sound of human suffering, then was abruptly silenced, cut off as if by an invisible hand. Every hair on my body stood on end, a prickling sensation of absolute dread. That sounded unmistakably like a human in mortal agony. Could it be Alaric? What if he's being attacked right now? What if I grabbed my knife, its cold hilt a flimsy comfort, and scrambled from the tent toward the awful sounds, the chilling silence that followed. "Dad, I'm coming," I shouted, my voice a desperate croak, as I sprinted recklessly through the trees, blindly following the phantom echoes in my mind. With no trail to follow, my mad dash through the forest carried me up a wooded ravine, driven on by pure adrenaline and terror at what I might discover. As I crested a hill, the trees opened up, revealing a small clearing nestled between the ridges, bathed in the pale, sickly light of dawn. I was met with a gruesome sight that stopped me dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. A huge, roughly circular pit had been dug in the middle of the clearing, easily 15 feet wide. Its dirt sides plunging 10 feet down to a floor bristling with sharpened wooden stakes and a macabre collection of animal bones. It was unmistakably a primitive trap, built with malicious intent, designed to capture and kill. Could this be responsible for the agonized screaming I heard earlier? My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee from this evil, blood-soaked place, but I had to know if this was the creature's lair, the ultimate, terrifying proof that it had taken Alaric. I crept slowly along the pit's grassy edge, my body rigid with apprehension, peering down apprehensively. The wooden spikes, crudely fashioned but lethally sharp, were caked in dried, blackish blood. Tufts of torn clothing, some of it vaguely familiar, and matted fur clung to them as well. And was that a human skull, grinning up at me from atop one of the stakes, its empty eye sockets seeming to stare straight into my soul? I staggered back, bile rising in my throat, a wave of nausea washing over me. What kind of sadistic monster builds something like this? What ancient, malevolent intelligence was at play here? As I stood shaking at the edge of the barbaric trap, the screams echoed through my mind again, sharper, more vivid than before. Maybe Alaric stumbled right into this clearing too, and met his end impaled in the pit, crying out his last breaths, his life bleeding out onto those brutal stakes. At that gruesome thought, my knees nearly gave out, threatening to send me tumbling into the horror below. I squeezed my eyes shut, mouthing a silent prayer that wasn't how Alaric died, that he deserved a better end than this. Drawing a shaky, ragged breath, I forced myself to turn away from the pit, from the silent, staring skull, and keep moving. I had to find him, or what's left of him, before this place consumed me too still reeling from the gruesome discoveries in the trapline clearing. The image of the skull burned into my mind. I scrambled back into the trees, just wanting to put distance between me and that horrific pit, to escape its silent, macabre judgment. As I ran, my breath ragged, the forest suddenly rang out with more agonized screaming just ahead, a raw, desperate sound that cut through the oppressive silence. Could it be survivors of the pit trap, somehow escaped, or new victims ensnared by something else? I crashed through the underbrush toward the screams, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They turned to chilling gurgles, wet and choked, that made my skin crawl, then silence again, an abrupt, heavy silence that felt like a closing door. I was getting close now, my own panicked breathing and the snapping twigs beneath my feet drowned out only by my pounding heartbeat. A frantic drum in my ears bursting into another small clearing, bathed in the pale, filtered light of the morning, I gasped at the sight before me. A massive elk lay sprawled on its side, its throat torn out, its belly gutted with brutal efficiency. Its glassy eyes stared at nothing, reflecting the dappled sunlight. Splashes of dark, wet blood drenched the grass around it, a gruesome tableau. I immediately understood. This poor animal's cries were what I heard, its dying screams. It must have escaped an attack only to come die here, its life draining out onto the forest floor. But what killed it? I circled the elk wearily, knife clutched in my trembling hand, taking in the deep, savage slashes in the side of its body. Some creature with huge claws and monstrous strength did this, something far beyond any natural predator. As I examined the elk's wounds, a cold, prickling sensation crept up my spine. I felt eyes upon me, a palpable presence lurking just out of sight, an ancient malevolence breathing down my neck. I froze, every nerve screaming, sensing something large and predatory shifting in the shadows. Moving slowly, deliberately, I drew my knife from its sheath, the cool steel a small comfort against the overwhelming fear. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee this place, but I had to know what was here. Is it the creature that took Alaric? Is it waiting for me? Come out and face me. I yelled into the trees, my voice cracking, sounding braver than I felt, a desperate challenge to the unseen horror. In response, a flock of ravens burst from the branches, cawing loudly, their dark wings beating against the air, their cries mocking. I spun toward the commotion, nearly jumping from my skin, my heart leaping into my throat, but it was just birds taking flight, not the beast. For now, at least. It was still out there, hunter and hunting, and it was terrifyingly clear I was in over my head against this primordial predator still wary of whatever killed this elk, its bloody carcass a grim monument nearby. I approached it slowly, knife poised to strike, every sense alert. As I reached the elk's body, I spotted the massive footprints pressed into the bloody earth around it. I crouched down to inspect one more closely. The track had a vaguely human shape, but dwarfed any man's foot, nearly 18 inches long from heel to toe, with that disturbing, malformed extra digit clearly visible, pressed deep into the soil. The depth and spacing between prints indicated something extremely heavy made them, something crushing effortlessly through sticks and underbrush as if they were nothing. What primordial nightmare could leave signs this huge? What ancient terror stalked these woods? The Arctic chill gripped my spine again despite the warming day, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. I followed the tracks a few yards into the bush, a morbid fascination overriding my fear. They led to an area of flattened grass where it appeared the creature had dragged the elk carcass back to feast on it, its temporary dining spot. I dug around in the depressed grass and unearthed chunks of loose fur and flesh, likely discarded by the beast. I held my breath against the raw stench of blood and decay, a smell that clung to the air like a shroud. Clearly, I was dealing with no ordinary animal here, and I was certain now it was the same creature that raided our camp and stole Alaric away. Could he still be alive as its captive somehow, enduring some horrific fate? The possibility, however faint, however horrifying, fueled a tiny shred of hope in me, a desperate flicker in the darkness. But how could I possibly rescue him from such a powerful, ruthless monster? A creature that seemed to belong to an age long past, as I pondered my bleak chances, my mind racing through impossible scenarios. A raven landed on the elk carcass and began tearing greedily at its tongue. I swatted it away with my hand, which startled nearby crows into a loud, wing-flapping frenzy, their caws echoing through the trees like grim laughter. Leaving the mutilated elk behind, I pressed on through the forest, following the ominous footprints, each one a step closer to an unimaginable horror. They led me over a gurgling stream and up a mossy embankment, the air growing heavier, colder. I emerged from the trees into another small clearing, littered with the remnants of what was once a campsite. Tattered canvas tent scraps hung from broken poles. Shredded clothes were strewn about, along with some empty cans of beans and boots with the toes ripped out, as if something had torn them off in a fit of rage or hunger. It looked like someone or some group had a camp here that met a violent end, a sudden, brutal destruction. Could these scraps belong to past victims of the creature, a gruesome collection of trophies? I rummaged through the ruins, my hands trembling, looking for any clues, any sign of what transpired, but found nothing of use. Everything had been torn apart in apparent rage, long ago, weathered by time and the elements. As I was crouched by the long cold fire pit, something shiny, half buried in the dirt, caught my eye. I dug it out with a shaking finger. It was a woman's silver locket, still smooth despite years of exposure, a tiny, defiant glint of humanity in this place of savagery. My thumb brushed away the grime clouding its surface. Engraved on the front were the faded, intertwined letters A+J. Who did this belong to? Who were A and J? I fastened the locket around my own neck for safekeeping, a small, cold weight against my skin, saying a quick, silent prayer for its unknown owner, AJ, whose last moments here must have been utterly terrifying. I picked through the camp remains a bit longer, but it seemed the only story to glean was one of unimaginable carnage, of a sudden, brutal end. These poor souls likely crossed paths with the formidable creature, and it did not end well for them. I hoped for better fortune finding Alaric if he remained alive to be found. But a cold certainty settled in my gut. This was its hunting ground, and we were the hunted. The creature's tracks, unnervingly clear despite the difficult terrain, wove deeper into the woods beyond the ravaged campsite, leading me further into its domain. With growing dread, I continued following them until the large prince veered off toward a massive, ancient old-growth spruce, its branches spreading wide like a dark, protective umbrella. Beneath its sprawling branches sat the cold remains of another campfire, recently burned out, its ashes still disturbed. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering, already fearing what I'd find, the scent of fear acrid in my nostrils. My heart dropped into my stomach when I spotted the tattered plaid shirt discarded next to the fire. It was Alaric's. He'd been wearing it the morning he disappeared, its familiar pattern a cruel mockery of comfort. I picked it up with trembling hands. The back was shredded, torn, and caked in dried, crusty blood. But it wasn't just shredded, it was arranged. The shirt had been laid out, almost meticulously, the ruined fabric fanned out like some grotesque display, a silent, chilling message. And the scent, not just blood and decay, but something else, something cold and ancient, like deep earth and iron. A smell that clung to the fabric. A smell I now recognized as the very essence of the creature, of its terrible presence. Collapsing to my knees, the cold seeping through my worn pants, I clutched the ruined shirt tightly against my chest and bowed my head, my shoulders shaking. I came all this way clinging to a thin, desperate hope that Alaric might still be alive, somehow, somewhere, but this grisly evidence extinguished that last flicker, snuffing it out like a dying ember. He must have stopped here to rest and build a fire, only to be savagely attacked without warning, like all the other hapless people whose paths crossed with this monster, whose lives were consumed by its ancient hunger. I squeezed my eyes shut, hot, stinging tears spilling down my cheeks, blurring the world into a painful, watery smear. Alaric is really gone. He's truly gone. The jarring reality sank through me, leaving only a profound, echoing numbness behind. What do I do now? Wander the wilderness solo until the creature comes for me too? Wait to be another trophy, another set of bones in its monstrous collection? The cold indifference of the Alaskan forest threatened to swallow me whole, to erase me from existence. But then slowly that numbness turned to a burning, agonizing hot anger, a furious red haze that clouded my vision. Alaric didn't deserve this horrific fate. No one did. He was a seeker, a scholar, not prey. If I can't save him, if he's truly beyond saving, I can at least avenge him. I can make sure the beast that killed him harms no one else ever again. I roughly smeared the tears from my face with the back of my hand, the coldness of them a stark contrast to the boiling rage within. I stood, my legs trembling, turning to follow the tracks again with a renewed, raging purpose, a desperate, primal resolve. This ends now. Seeing the bloody, arranged shreds of Alaric's shirt extinguished the last flicker of hope I'd been cradling, that irrational belief that he was somehow still alive. Kneeling on the cold, unforgiving ground next to the abandoned campfire, I clutched his ruined shirt tightly in my fists and let the crushing anguish wash over me. A tidal wave of grief. "No, please God, no," I sobbed, the words torn from my throat, hot tears spilling down my cheeks, blurring the world into a painful, watery mess. I knew Alaric was likely gone the minute I saw those giant footprints leaving our camp, leaving me behind, but some irrational, desperate part of me still clung to the belief that I'd find him out here somehow, maybe wounded, but alive, broken but whole. Now only his bloodied scraps remained, ripped from his body by unseen claws and teeth. The proof was undeniable, visceral. Alaric was dead. The beast dragged him from our camp silently, efficiently, and slaughtered him like prey, perhaps while I slept just yards away, obliviously dreaming, while that monster tore him apart, blinding guilt mixed with piercing grief, a toxic brew in my gut. I should have done something, somehow stopped this horrible fate that Alaric didn't deserve, that no one deserved. He only wanted to bond with me over a camping trip, to share his esoteric passion, and it led him to a violent, solitary death so far from home, in a place he revered. I yearned to scream my anguish at the indifferent Alaskan sky, to tear my hair out in frustration. But I knew it would only echo unheard through the endless trees, a futile cry in the face of ancient evil. Alaric is gone, and he's never coming back. I'm alone in the wild now, so far over my head against a powerful, ancient predator, a thing of nightmare. But as I knelt, rocking back and forth, mourning my father, grief slowly morphed into rage, red hot and simmering, a burning coal in my chest. I will make this creature pay. If it's the last thing I ever do, if I perish in the attempt, I will make it pay. It brutally killed my father, the only family I had left, the only person who truly understood me. Now I have nothing to lose in destroying it, or perishing in the attempt. I roughly wiped away my tears, smearing dirt across my face, still clutching Alaric's tattered shirt in my fist, its rough fabric now a symbol of my vengeance. As the red-hot rage coursed through me, eclipsing the anguish, burning away the fear, I hardened my resolve. This creature will pay dearly for killing my father. I'll make certain of it. No more cowering like prey for me now. I was the hunter now, driven by a fury as primal as the beast's own. I stalked back to the abandoned campsite, the one that had held the silver locket, its ruins a testament to past horrors, and scoured the remains for anything I could use as a weapon, anything that might give me an edge. In a torn pack, half buried beneath rotten canvas, I found a hatchet with a chipped but still deadly blade. I picked up a Bowie knife from the dirt too, its handle slick with grime, and felt the familiar, reassuring weight of it in my hand, a promise of violence. Together with my own hunting knife, I was armed, crudely but fiercely, and ready to hunt the hunter. Near the trampled tents was a battered wooden box with explosives stamped on the side in faded, almost invisible letters. Inside lay coiled fuse wire and several sticks of TNT in crumbling paper wrappers, brittle with age. Looks like salvage from the miners who must have camped here long ago, their dreams shattered by this very wilderness, perhaps by this very creature. I grinned wickedly, a cold, grim smile that felt alien on my face, perfect for baiting some traps. I packed up the axes, the dynamite, and all the wire I could salvage, every piece a grim weapon. As an afterthought, I grabbed an empty glass bottle too, its neck still jagged where it was broken, a potential weapon of last resort. Luring this beast will take every weapon, every dirty trick, every ounce of courage I've got. For you, Dad, I whispered, the words of vow as I shouldered the supplies, turning to follow the monster's path back into the trees, its ancient hunting ground. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for my confrontation with the creature that killed Alaric, driven by a relentless, cold fury. Using the hatchets and knives, I sharpened the edges of fallen saplings into crude, lethal spears and posts, their tips jagged and unforgiving. These I drove into the earth in a tight cluster, then strategically draped the area with foliage and loose earth to disguise it as a punji trap, its deadly spikes hidden from sight. Nearby, I assembled a deadfall trap with heavy logs propped precariously over a trip wire, designed to crush anything unlucky enough to trigger it. Camouflaged pits lined with stakes surrounded the clearing where I assembled my traps, each one a silent promise of pain. Each trap, each pit, I baited with chunks of elk meat, leaving them to attract the creature with the raw scent of fresh blood, knowing it would be drawn to it. No matter where it enters this area, no matter its path, it'll meet an unpleasant surprise, a painful welcome to its downfall. Now to set the final lure, the most explosive element of my plan. I punctured small holes in the glass bottle sides, then stuffed the old TNT sticks inside, their crumbling paper wrappers still smelling faintly of sulfur. Feeling the destructive power in my hands, I knew this would make a hell of a diversionary explosion when I needed it, a loud, brutal surprise. I found a high rocky ledge overlooking the network of traps and wired the bottle with a long fuse I could light from cover and safety, a safe distance from the blast. As the sky reddened with the final light of sunset, painting the clouds in fiery hues, I finished assembling my ambush, and then retreated a good distance to my hidden overlook, concealed behind a cluster of ancient pines. Soon the crickets and nighthawks began their dusk songs, their chirps and calls the only sound in the growing silence. My heart pounded with adrenaline, a frantic drum in my chest, eager for the fight ahead, a primal readiness. That monster deserves a slow, agonizing end for what it did. As night fell, black and starless, I sat, sharpening my blades, honing the edge of my rage, ready to avenge Alaric. That night, amidst the chilling chorus of the Alaskan wilderness, I was awoken by a trap snapping shut on something, a violent, splintering crack that echoed through the trees. I must have dozed off for a bit despite the adrenaline, despite the gnawing fear, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake to the sound of crunching branches and a high-pitched, guttural squealing echoing up from the forest below, a sound of agony. I blinked the grogginess away, my eyes still heavy, and spotted a dark, massive shape thrashing violently in my pungy pit below, the sapling spears digging deeper into its flesh with every desperate movement. Yes, my trap worked. It caught something. I lit my makeshift explosives fuse from the ledge, the spark a tiny flare in the overwhelming darkness, then scrambled down an access trail I'd left myself, moving as fast as my aching body would allow. The twisted cries coming from the pit were awful, heart-wrenching, but also welcome, a grim satisfaction. As I reached the edge, my breath ragged, I bore witness to the horror trapped below. A massive grizzly, its fur matted with dark blood, was impaled at all angles by the sharpened spears, tearing itself into worse wounds trying to break free, its roars turning to pathetic whimpers, then gurgles. I left the dying grizzly caught in my trap, its struggles slowly diminishing. It wasn't the creature I was hunting, not the true monster. As I crept back through the moonlit woods, my makeshift torch held aloft, casting flickering light and shadow across the ancient trees, my heart pounded, a frantic drum in my ears. My feet avoided dry twigs and crunching leaves, my senses heightened, attuned to every subtle sound. I approached the area I'd left baited and rigged, my grip tightening on my knife. Was the predator here, stalking its prey, aware of my presence? My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the stealthy steps tracking me in return, a soft, heavy pad just beyond the reach of my light. I wheeled around frequently, brandishing my torch and knife against the darkened forest, calling out into the silence, but always nothing was there, just shadows and the hum of unseen life, until the hairs on my neck stood up, sensing the eyes upon me once more, a primal certainty of being watched. Something smart and deadly was toying with me, keeping its distance, a silent, unseen menace, but it wouldn't for long. I just needed to draw it fully into my web to force its hand. When I reached the bait pile, still untouched, a chilling certainty swept over me. My plan had failed. That beast didn't take my offering. It wasn't interested in mere meat. And now it knew to avoid this area, it was too clever. Cursing under my breath, a raw, bitter sound, I crept back toward my distant camp, defeated for tonight but not broken, merely postponed. Just as the flame in my torch flickered, sputtered, and died, two glowing, malevolent eyes appeared inches from my face, a terrifying, sudden presence in the absolute darkness. My torch winked out just as I emerged into a moonlit clearing halfway back to camp, plunging me into an abrupt, disorienting darkness. I paused, my breath catching, struggling to see in the pale, insufficient moonlight that filtered through the thick canopy. As my vision slowly adjusted, fighting against the blackness, I detected a subtle shift in the deeper darkness at the tree line. Two small orbs seemed to float there, reflecting the weak light unnaturally, too perfectly. I stared, trying to make sense of this unsettling phenomenon, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. Then it hit me, cold and hard. Those were eyes. I backed up slowly, every sense screaming danger, a primal, ancient warning ringing in my ears. The eyes advanced from the shadows, low to the ground and blazing a malevolent, fiery red, pulsating with an intelligence no beast possesses, an ancient, predatory cunning. A massive shape began taking form, rising from the gloom, easily 9 feet tall and as broad as a bear, its bulk blocking out the meager moonlight. An awful, ancient odor like deep earth, iron, and something else, something fetid and profoundly wrong, overtook the scene, issuing from matted, dark fur covering impossibly large limbs and torso. I spotted jagged claws, long and curved like daggers, and teeth glinting in the moonlight as the creature stepped fully into view, a monstrous silhouette against the faint glow of the sky. Every instinct in me shrieked to run, to flee, to simply cease to exist, but I stood frozen in primal terror, rooted to the spot, my muscles locked. This was it. This was the predator that took Alaric from our camp. I was sure of it, absolutely, terrifyingly certain. But nothing could have prepared me for something so huge, so monstrous, so utterly, profoundly wrong, a thing from nightmare. I should flee into the night, into the welcoming darkness, yet I was paralyzed by those devilish, glowing eyes piercing my soul, holding me captive. Death had tracked me down, not to simply claim me, but to play its wicked games for a while, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was utterly, hopelessly outmatched here in this dark forest. The towering beast was upon me in an instant, moving with shocking, unnatural speed for its immense size, a blur of fur and muscle. Its massive hand, disproportionately large, clamped down on my shoulder, talons digging painfully into my flesh, biting deep. I was lifted off my feet like a rag doll, weightless, and flung backwards with tremendous bone-jarring force. My back and head cracked against the unyielding tree trunk behind me, exploding my vision into a shower of blinding sparks, a kaleidoscope of pain. As I slumped to the ground, clinging to consciousness by a thread, my body screaming in protest, I watched helplessly as the blurred, monstrous shape of the creature loomed over me, its red eyes blazing. I tried to scramble away on all fours to crawl to escape, but my limbs had turned to jelly, useless, unresponsive. The blow to my head clouded everything in a dizzy, nauseating haze, my thoughts fragmented. The monster reached down with another impossibly large hand and seized me by the shirt collar, yanking me up like I weighed nothing, lifting me eye level with its terrifying face. Fetid, hot breath blasted my face as it roared triumphantly, a guttural sound that made my ears ring, vibrating through my very bones. Those glowing red eyes bored into mine with primal hunger and an ancient, consuming hate as its jaws opened wide, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, each one a dagger. This is it, I'm monster food. This is how it ends. As the beast pulled me towards its salivating maw, its razor-sharp claws poised to tear me apart, my senses finally collapsed into blackness. Everything went numb, and I was swallowed up by the void. A merciful oblivion. Cold, damp, and stale air was the first sensation as I regained consciousness. It filled my nostrils and mouth with its tomb-like essence, a smell of ancient stone and decay. My throbbing head pulsed in time to my heartbeat, a dull, insistent rhythm, as I forced my leaden eyelids open. Inky, absolute darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating, impenetrable. I tried to blink away the blackness to conjure some light, but it stubbornly remained, unyielding. Where am I? As feeling slowly, painfully returned to my limbs, a pins and needles sensation, I shifted slightly and heard the chilling rattle of chains. The icy bite of metal encircled my left ankle, a heavy shackle. I was chained, tethered in this lightless, airless place, wherever it may be. Fear, cold and stark, ripped through me as blurred, disjointed memories returned. Being ambushed by that beast, the crushing blow, being thrown against a tree with terrific force. It must have dragged me to its lair while I was out cold, a captive in its domain. But where and why am I still alive? I swept my hands, trembling, over the cold, damp floor around me. My fingers encountered smooth, rounded objects that seemed to be bones. Human bones from the size and shape, undeniably. Lots of them. Skulls, ribs, femurs. My breath quickened, catching in my throat, a frantic gasp. Oh God, this is a mass grave. I'm in a burial chamber. I recoiled in fresh horror, pulling my hands back, only to brush against another mound of remains behind me, a silent, macabre wall. I was completely surrounded by a grisly trove of gnawed, scattered skeletons, a monument to the creature's victims. Full, unadulterated panic set in, overwhelming me. I lurched against the chain manacling my leg, pulling with desperate force, but it only bit deeper into my flesh, a cold, iron grip. Help! I screamed into the silent, echoing darkness, my voice thin and reedy. Get me out of here! But my pleas went unanswered, swallowed by the cavern, echoing down unknown corridors until they died into nothingness. Rocking back and forth, consumed by terror, I closed my eyes and prayed this was just a nightmare, a horrifying hallucination I'd wake from soon. But nightmares don't generally come with pain, and the throbbing in my head, the burning in my ankle, reminded me this was all too real. A waking hell time lost all meaning in this place. Had it been hours or days since I awoke chained in this tomb? Starvation and thirst were setting in, bringing constant, dull headaches, waves of dizziness, and a profound weakness. When my end would come in this hellhole, this gruesome waiting room, I didn't know. But then I heard something. A shuffling in the dark, a dragging sound. Heavy, clawed feet dragging a heavy object across the stone floor, the sound echoing in the vast, unseen space. My blood turned to ice, congealing in my veins. I pressed against the cold, damp cave wall, willing myself invisible, willing myself to become one with the rock, as the shambling footsteps drew closer, accompanied by the skittering of loose pebbles, an unsettling counterpoint to the heavy tread. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, my heart jackhammering against my ribs, so loud I was sure the creature could hear it. A guttural snort, deep and resonant, echoed from just yards away as I finally detected the outline of my monstrous captor emerging from the blackness, a hulking silhouette against the utter void. It dragged the carcass of a massive elk, larger than any I had ever seen, leaving a glistening trail of dark blood on the cave floor. By the meager, malevolent light reflecting in its glowing red eyes, the only source of illumination, I watched the hulking beast settle beside its fresh kill and tear ravenously into the elk's belly with savage fangs and claws, a horrifying, primal feast. Strings of gore sprayed the cave floor as it feasted, the sounds sickeningly loud in the confined space. Hot, metallic-scented blood splashed my face and arms, mixing with the cold sweat of terror that coated my skin. The gruesome sight made my mind reel, threatening to send me back into oblivion. I should be dead, like this elk. Why had the beast kept me alive if not to toy sadistically with me first, to savor its prey? Eyes squeezed shut, I silently prayed for courage I didn't possess, or the mercy of a quick death, a swift end to this torment. I studied it, looking for any weakness I could exploit for escape, any crack in its monstrous armor. The sounds of the feast dragged on for what seemed like an eternity, bones cracking, meat tearing, the monster's guttural grunts of satisfaction. I didn't dare open my eyes again until the sounds tapered off, finally receding into silence. A heavy thump told me the beast had flung aside what remained of its meal, sated. I risked a tiny glance and saw it sprawled on its side in a stupor, its bulging stomach exposed, its breathing slow and heavy. Now may be my only chance, hardly daring to breathe, every nerve screaming with the effort of stillness. I observed every inch of the creature from the relative safety of the shadows. Even sitting, it loomed enormous, at least 9 feet tall, probably over 500 pounds of raw, unadulterated power. Matted, wiry fur, dark as the cave itself, covered its ape-like frame, rippling with unconscious movement. The head was the most monstrous part, flat nose, jutting brow, a jaw full of jagged fangs capable of crushing bone. Overall, it looked like the warped offspring of a prehistoric man and a massive bear, a hideous amalgamation. My desperate search found no obvious physical weakness. Its proportions appeared thickly muscled and powerful throughout, built for destruction. I glanced anxiously at my chained ankle, the metal biting cold into my skin. The only way to escape seemed to be unlocking this shackle or slipping my foot out, an impossible feat given the tight fit, but I'd need a plan for when it woke, a way to move undetected. For now, I'll keep studying it for any opening to exploit, any small advantage that might change the odds from impossible to merely suicidal. The creature had finally stirred, stretched its enormous limbs, and trudged off down one of the adjoining cavern tunnels, its heavy steps fading into the distance, leaving me alone again. But there was no telling when it would return, when it would resume its cruel game. Now was likely my only chance to attempt escape, to break free from this living nightmare. I strained at the heavy shackle until veins bulged along my forehead, a desperate, futile effort, but the metal only cut deeper into my raw, bleeding ankle. The chain remained anchored firmly to a thick metal spike driven deep in the solid rock, unyielding. Desperate, my mind racing, I searched the pile of bones surrounding me, the remains of its previous victims, looking for anything small and rigid enough to pick the lock. Finding a splintered femur, a gruesome tool, I jammed it into the keyhole and worked furiously, my hands trembling with urgency. After minutes of probing and twisting, of frantic, fumbling efforts, there was still no give, no satisfying click. My frustration mounted, a burning resentment, as the femur fragment kept snapping and crumbling in the lock, proving useless. Spitting curses, a raw animal sound, I searched for wire or a slim piece of metal among the victim's remains, maybe a piece of old jewelry, anything that could trip the mechanism, but I found nothing usable. Only more fragments of broken bone, silent witnesses to despair. Defeated, my energy draining, I slammed my fists against the unyielding cave floor until they were torn and bloodied, the pain a dull throb. Rage brewing inside, impotent and furious, I grabbed a rock and began smashing it against the spike pinning my chain, a frantic, desperate effort. But it was driven in at least 6 inches and barely budged against my weakened, clumsy blows. Breath heaving, my body shaking, I collapsed back against the wall, glancing at the dark tunnel where the beast departed. My blood turned colder, imagining it could return at any second, its malevolent eyes blazing. I had failed. My hope, fragile as it was, dimmed along with the chance of escape as I despairingly examined my raw, ruined hands by touch in the pitch blackness. Tracing the torn skin and bleeding nail beds, a faint noise in the distance made my ears prick up. It almost sounded like a voice, thin and reedy. I held my breath and listened intently, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart, until it came again. A ragged, choked cry of pain from somewhere far down one of the adjoining tunnels, a sound of agony that pierced the suffocating silence. Could it be Alaric, somehow alive and trapped here too? Dad, is that you? I shouted into the darkness, my voice breaking, cracked with disuse and desperate hope. No response, just the eerie silence swallowing my words. But after a moment, another pained yell echoed back, weaker this time, a fading cry. It was unmistakable. It was my father's voice, a sound I knew more intimately than my own. He must be shackled in a distant cavern, crying out in agony, just as I was. The beast seemed to be slowly torturing him for its own sick amusement, prolonging his suffering. Just hold on, Dad. I'm going to get us out of here. I yelled desperately down the stone corridor, my voice raw with renewed purpose. Hearing him suffering so nearby was too much to bear, a torture worse than my own imprisonment. I clawed and pried with renewed frenzy at the spike pinning my chain, ignoring the hot blood now slicking both hands, ignoring the searing pain. That monster is hurting my dad. I have to get loose. Alaric's hoarse screams went quiet again, leaving only the deafening silence, an unbearable emptiness. Sobbing in anguish and fury, a raw, animal sound, I kept tearing at the unbreakable bonds tethering me, heedless of broken nails and mangled fingers, heedless of the pain. I cried out promises of rescue, though he likely couldn't hear now, lost in his own suffering. Holding on to hope, that desperate, foolish thing, was all I could do, all I had left. I clawed desperately at the loose rocks and hard-packed earth around the metal spike, trying to dig it out to loosen its grip. My broken and bloody fingernails left deep gouges in the unyielding cave floor, but no matter how much grit and dirt I scraped away, the spike remained lodged fast in the rock, unmoving, impregnable. Exhausted and frantic, my strength failing, I chipped away at the metal bolt itself with a sharp stone, hoping to weaken or snap it, to sever the connection, but with my awkward angle and clumsy grip, I barely scratched the surface. All I accomplished was flaying the skin from my fingers and palms until they were shredded and oozing red, raw and stinging. I ignored the searing pain, the dull ache in my head, and kept digging relentlessly, driven by Alaric's distant cries. I had to get free before that beast returns, before it decided to finish us both. But by now, I was dripping blood and gritty with sweat and grime, my body trembling with exhaustion. Still, the chains wouldn't budge an inch. Anguish and frustration rose in my throat, a bitter taste, as I slumped back, staring down at my ruined hands, shaking with fatigue. Blood steadily dripped from my mangled fingertips as the shackle continued to bite cruelly into my ankle, a cold, unyielding embrace. No amount of raw determination can overcome this obstacle. I'm still trapped in the monster's lair. Tears leaked down my grimy cheeks as I faced the grim reality. There's no escaping this cave on my own. I'm helpless to save either of us. All my desperate efforts have only weakened me further, draining my remaining strength. Lightheaded from pain and blood loss, consumed by despair, I slumped over, awaiting death or worse, imagining the monster's return. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I whispered, the words a silent plea to the suffocating darkness. I must have blacked out again, consumed by pain and exhaustion, because the next thing I know, heavy footsteps are approaching, growing louder and gravel scrapes beneath monstrous claws, a horrifying, familiar sound. I force my crusted eyes open to see two malevolent red orbs glowing in the blackness, growing larger, as the creature comes for me. It pauses just feet away, its massive head cocked, nostrils flaring as it smells my blood, the coppery scent thick in the air. I spot the deep furrows I clawed around the spike before passing out, raw testament to my futile struggle. The beast's eyes narrow, its gaze piercing, and it lets out a low, rumbling snarl bearing jagged fangs, a sound of ancient, predatory displeasure. I try to scramble away to recoil, but I'm too weak, too woozy, my limbs unresponsive. The creature grabs me around the throat, its enormous hairy hand crushing my windpipe, and heaves me up like a misbehaving pup, effortlessly, brutally. Hot, rank breath blasts my face and hairy paws crush my windpipe. Spots explode across my vision as I dangle and wheeze for air, struggling, futilely. Just when I feel consciousness slipping away, abandoning me, it hurls me back to the hard ground, sending another jolt of pain through my battered body. As I lie gasping like a landed fish, unable to draw a full breath, it looms over me, a dark mountain of fur and muscle, claw raised threateningly. I know what's coming and close my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Punishment doled out by this monster will be nothing compared to what my failure has likely already cost Alaric. As the first brutal blows rain down, a sickening thud of flesh on bone, I retreat deep within my mind, seeking solace in memories far from this eternal night, from this endless pain. Someday, the pain will end. The beating seems to last forever, an eternity of agony, until I'm barely clinging to awareness, my body a bruised, broken shell. When it finally stops, the sudden silence almost as terrifying as the blows, I don't dare move, don't dare breathe. Each shallow breath sends fire through my ribs. Surely the monster has beaten me to within an inch of death. This time I'll never free Alaric or myself now. Suddenly, I hear my father's screams echoing again, weaker than before, a raw, desperate sound, but undeniably his. The sound, a phantom thread connecting me to him, reignites some primal protective fire in me, a spark of defiance amidst the despair. I have to try and save him, even if it means sacrificing myself, offering myself as a final, desperate bargain. Mustering my last reserves of strength, every fiber of my being burning, I rasp out, my voice a broken whisper, "Please, stop hurting him. Take me instead." The creature pauses, its massive head cocked, its glowing red eyes fixed on me, an unnerving stillness. Emboldened, or perhaps just driven by a final, desperate madness, I raise my voice louder, words tearing from my raw throat. "Let my father go, take me in his place. I offer myself." I repeat this desperate plea over and over, a litany, ready to offer my life if this evil being, this ancient intelligence, can understand mercy, can understand sacrifice. It stares down at me for an eternity with no hint of emotion on its alien, grotesque face, its eyes unblinking. Then, moving deliberately with an unnerving slowness, the beast reaches down, its fingers surprisingly agile, unlocks my shackle, and wrenches me up by the arm, the sudden movement jarring. Is it leading me to my execution, to a more gruesome end? I stumble along weakly as it drags me towards Alaric's screams, now closer, stronger, prepared to meet my fate if it will save him, if my sacrifice can truly set him free. The creature drags me stumbling through pitch-black tunnels, my head spinning with blood loss, my body a chorus of aches. But I don't resist, focused only on reaching Alaric, on seeing him one last time. We emerge into a small cavern, faintly lit by a crevice overhead, a thin, ethereal shaft of light cutting through the gloom. There, hunched and broken, chained to the far wall, is Alaric. He raises his head slowly, painfully, his eyes wide, as if believing I'm only a hallucination, a figment of his fevered mind. I lurch forward despite the monster's grip, falling from its grasp and collapse at Alaric's feet. We cling together, both battered and broken, covered in dirt and blood, weeping tears of joy and grief, a desperate, raw reunion. After what feels like a lifetime, I lean back to look at him in the dim, unforgiving light. His face is swollen and bloodied, almost beyond recognition, a mask of suffering. His eyes, though, are the most disturbing. They hold a strange, vacant calm, an unsettling, deep-knowing peace that feels utterly alien in our horrific predicament, in this place of death. I can only imagine how I must appear to him in turn, but nothing matters now except that we're together again, against all odds, alive. "I was afraid I'd lost you, son," Alaric says, his voice a dry, cracking whisper, but his eyes hold that unsettling serenity, that profound, unreadable calm. Our relief is short-lived, a cruel trick. The creature, silent and efficient, grabs me by the hair and clamps the shackle around my own ankle, the cold metal a familiar, terrible weight. I'm chained beside Alaric, close enough to touch, but we remain trapped, deep in the creature's lair. Its prisoners once more chained beside my father in the cramped, dank cavern, the air heavy with the scent of blood and decay. I felt the will to survive slowly leaving my battered body, draining away like sand through my fingers. But Alaric, sensing my despair, grasped my hand fiercely in the darkness, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't give up hope, Kaelin," he whispered, his voice still hoarse, but with an underlying conviction, a strange, resolute strength that chilled me more than comforted. "We're getting out of this hellhole. Whatever it takes, I swear I'll get you home. We will escape this." His firm determination, that unsettling calm, ignited my fading spirit like flint to steel, a desperate spark. I managed a weak smile despite the direness of our plight, a grim acknowledgement. "We'll get out together," I vowed, my voice barely audible. "I'm not leaving this cave without you." Not ever studying our small, claustrophobic prison, I noticed a peculiar bone near Alaric's chained foot, one of the many skeletal remains scattered about. But this bone was different. It was thicker than the rest, with a bulky, rounded end, clearly a weapon if wielded right. It looked like the femur of a woolly mammoth or a giant elk, something ancient and powerful. I pointed it out to Alaric, my eyes gleaming with a desperate idea. He tested the heft and balance of the heavy bone club, his movements slow but deliberate, then gave me a fierce grin, the first genuine spark of hope lit in his eyes since we were reunited, though that unnerving, profound calm remained, a steady, chilling undercurrent. "It's not much," he rasped, his voice still rough, "but it'll give that ugly bastard a wallop once we get the chance." A good, solid thud. We worked together, our movements slow and painful, to angle the club within his reach, propping it against a small mound of bones. Even chained, Alaric should be able to swing it with brutal, crushing force when needed. We quietly celebrated this tiny advantage, this small flicker of possibility, with our first drink of water as captives, rationing the murky, cold drops that dripped from the ceiling, catching them in a cupped hand. It tasted sweet, despite its murkiness, quenching our parched throats, a small victory. We didn't have to wait long before heavy, rhythmic footsteps shook the tunnel floor, announcing the creature's inevitable return. I exchanged a meaningful, desperate look with Alaric. It was time. I belly crawled to the edge of the faint light's perimeter, fortifying my nerves, my heart pounding, a frantic drum in my chest. Alaric wrapped both hands around the mammoth bone, his grip firm, poised to strike as the glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness, two malevolent beacons in the black. I threw a loose stone, a desperate, clumsy projectile, striking its torso with a dull thud. The creature, surprised, snarled, a low, guttural sound, turning its massive head my way, its focus momentarily shifting. I desperately scrambled back, pressing myself against the cold wall, but its focus held on me just long enough. With an enraged cry, a guttural sound torn from his own throat, Alaric leaped up, pulling against his chain, and swung the club with all his might, a desperate, powerful blow. It connected solidly with the beast's left knee in a sickening crunch, a spray of dark blood blossoming in the dim light. The massive leg buckled sideways. A twisted, unnatural bend the monster's head whipped toward Alaric, its eyes blazing with fury, its other hand raising to strike, but quicker than seemed possible for its size. The creature slammed him against the wall in a crushing chokehold, its massive hand engulfing his throat. My father's face purpled as his chained legs flailed desperately, clawing at the air. I screamed, a raw, piercing sound, and clutched at the monstrous hand, trying fruitlessly to free him, my small hands useless against its immense strength. It glared at me with those malevolent red eyes, twin fires of ancient hate, and tightened its grip around Alaric's throat. Just as black spots swarmed my vision and Alaric's struggles grew weaker, there was a whistling sound, a faint whoosh, and a wet, sickening thunk. The creature's snarling face went slack, its eyes glazing over, and the hand dropped Alaric. He crumpled, gasping for breath, clutching his throat. Behind the dazed monster, the mammoth bone club clattered to the ground, heavy and dark. Somehow Alaric must have struck its injured knee again, sending them both toppling, and on the way down, with a final, desperate surge of strength, he smashed the monster's skull with the club, crushing bone, reducing it to a pulpy mess. It swayed, a towering, broken thing, dark blood sheeting from its deformed head, pouring from a gaping wound. Those demonic eyes rolled back, becoming milky and vacant. With a loud, shuddering thud like a felled tree, it hit the ground, its massive body shaking the very cave Alaric staggered over, grabbing the blood-coated club, its surface slick and warm. He began savagely bashing the creature's head and neck, again and again, reducing both to a pulpy ruin, a grotesque mess of fur, bone, and flesh. I wanted to look away from the gruesome scene, to shield my eyes from the sheer brutality of it, but I couldn't. We were both running on instinct now, survive at any cost, become as savage as the beast itself. When only mangled meat remained above its shoulders, a formless horror, Alaric finally stopped, breathing hard, his chest heaving, his eyes still holding that unsettling calm. The thing that haunted our nightmares, the ancient malevolence, now looked pitiful, a mere pile of matted fur and bones, its power gone. We cut its reign of terror short in this dark cave forever. And yet our desperation remained. I couldn't tear my eyes from the sight as Alaric brought the club down with crushing, relentless force on the beast's skull. There was a sick splintering sound on impact, wet and sickening. Its legs buckled and the Sasquatch, no, something far older, far more terrible, toppled like a felled redwood, hitting the stone floor hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling, a shower of fine gray powder. For a moment it lay there, a dark, spreading puddle haloing its mangled head, its limbs twitching with residual energy. I held my breath, terrified that any second it would rise up and resume its attack with renewed fury, that its death was a trick. But the massive body remained sprawled and motionless, aside from a few awful, involuntary twitches running through the limbs. Alaric prodded its arm wearily with the bone club, poised to strike again, his face grim. There was no response, no flicker of life. He turned and gave me a fierce, relieved smile through the blood and grime coating his face, that strange, quiet calm still present in his eyes, a depth I couldn't fathom. I crawled over to join him, my body aching, hardly able to believe our luck, our brutal triumph. Alaric crushed the monster's skull with that mammoth bone, using only adrenaline and a desperate primal strength. "Help me search it, quick, before it wakes up, before anything else happens," Alaric said, his voice strained but urgent, as he began rifling through the thick, matted hide of the fallen beast. We frantically combed through its fur, desperate, looking for anything that could possibly free us from these shackles and this terrible cave. Just when hope was fading, when my fingers brushed against nothing but rough fur, Alaric's voice, sharp with triumph, cut through the gloom. "Aha!" He held up a small metal pick triumphantly, a glint of polished steel in the faint light. I recognized it, barely. It was a miner's tool for cleaning and scraping ore deposits, likely taken from one of its previous victims. It just might work. Alaric knelt by my chained ankle and carefully inserted the pick into the lock, his movements delicate, precise, exquisitely focused, as if he had done this before. He delicately maneuvered the pins inside, his brow furrowed in concentration. The seconds crawled by agonizingly, each one stretching into an eternity. I glanced anxiously between his focused face and the Sasquatch's motionless, grotesque body just feet away, half expecting it to rise up at any moment. Finally, I heard the glorious, metallic click of the tumblers aligning, a sound sweeter than any music. The iron cuff sprang open. My raw, chafed ankle was finally free after what felt like days, perhaps weeks, of brutal confinement. I could have cried from the sheer relief, a wave of lightness washing over me. Alaric made short work of his own lock too, his fingers deftly working the pick, and then, slowly, painfully, helped me to my feet. The tunnel twisted and rose, a winding passage leading upwards, and eventually, fresh, crisp air, smelling of pine and damp earth, kissed my face. With a final, desperate burst of energy, we scrambled up the rocky passage on hands and knees toward that beautiful, blinding light, toward freedom. Together, Alaric and I burst out into the open forest, blinking against the harsh sunlight, gulping the free air hungrily, deeply. But we didn't stop running, not really, knowing the nightmare was right on our heels, an unseen shadow trailing us. It had been days, maybe weeks, in that lightless underworld. Emerging battered and bedraggled, time and direction lost meaning, blurring into an endless fugue of pain and desperate hope. Alaric and I slowly picked our way along the riverbank, struggling to stay upright with each agonizing step, our bodies bruised and broken. When the terrain got too steep, too rugged for our battered legs, we clawed up slopes on all fours like animals, driven by a primal need to escape. Mile after mile we pressed on, trading weak encouragement or leaning to rest in silence, our unspoken communication the only comfort. The pristine river soon grew choked with outstretched roots from shoreline spruce that provided welcome handholds, their gnarled forms a lifeline. An ancient bear trail marked by deep, old claw marks appeared along the bank, which we gratefully followed out of the craggy canyon into gentler forest foothills. Alaric's energy, which had seemed so depleted, surged with a strange, unnatural vitality when we spotted a crumbling cabin nestled ahead by the river's edge, barely visible through the trees. It was abandoned, offering only a brief, meager break from the elements, a hollow shell of human habitation. Replenishing our strength as best we could, scavenging for berries and roots, we set forth again downriver, now following faint trails that showed subtle signs of man, old boot prints, a discarded tin can, faint paths. I smiled for the first time in weeks, a genuine, aching smile, when familiar smoke trails appeared above the trees ahead. Our camp. Somehow, against all odds, we found our way back, drawn by some invisible thread of fate. It's been over 40 years now since that fateful Alaskan camping trip with my father, Alaric. But even today, hardly a day goes by that I don't think back to that summer of '72 and what we endured out there in the unforgiving wilderness. It fundamentally changed both of us, irrevocably, profoundly. After finally limping back to our campsite, more dead than alive, gaunt and spectral, we managed to contact a bush pilot using our emergency radio to come retrieve us within a couple of days. I'll never forget the look on that pilot's face when he landed on the gravel bar and saw two bloodied, dirt-caked skeletons emerge from the forest, their eyes wide and haunted. I don't think he believed our delirious, whispered tales of a towering man-beast, an ancient horror deep in those woods that hunted men for sport and kept them in its bone-littered lair. He chalked it up to a severe bear attack, hypothermia, and starvation-induced hallucinations, a convenient, rational explanation for the unimaginable. But Alaric and I knew the truth. We spent what felt like an eternity as playthings, trapped in that lightless cave by a creature whose evil surpassed any natural animal, whose intelligence was ancient and malevolent. No one could ever understand what we endured, how close we came to adding to the human remains littering its lair, if not for our final, desperate escape, a brutal, last-ditch fight for survival. That summer instilled a wariness of the darkness in me that I've never fully shaken. To this day, I still sleep with a nightlight because of the vivid, horrifying memories of that lightless cave, the crushing blackness. Claustrophobia kept me from ever scuba diving or spelunking with friends, and the paranoia of being watched from the woods, the chilling certainty of unseen eyes, persisted into my 20s until I finally sought counseling, trying to unravel the threads of terror woven into my soul. But the experience also left me resilient to life's everyday struggles, forging me in a fire I never asked for. After staring down a living nightmare like I did at 16, most problems seemed trivial in comparison. I truly believe surviving that prepared me for emotional hardships to come, for the inevitable pains of life, like grieving Alaric's death from cancer last winter. He was my anchor, the man who, in his own strange way, taught me unimaginable courage in the face of darkness, in the face of the truly inexplicable. But even after his death, a chilling, insidious realization slowly settled over me, a truth colder than any Alaskan winter. Alaric was never truly the same after Alaska. Yes, he was scarred, haunted by the experience as I was. But there was also that unnerving calm, that peculiar emptiness in his eyes that only deepened with the years, a distant, unreadable quality. He'd sometimes stare blankly into the dense forest behind our home, whispering about ancient ones or the old earth, about a communion or an acceptance, as if still in conversation, still in communion with something unseen, something primordial. His cancer, when it came, was aggressive, consuming him from the inside out, a decay that felt less like illness and more like a slow, internal dissolution, a hollowing out. Sometimes in his final days, when I leaned close, when his breath was shallow and his eyes glazed with that unnerving calm, I thought I caught a faint, strange scent clinging to him, like cold earth and iron, the very smell of that creature's lair, of its ancient, malevolent presence. And then, a few weeks after he was gone, after the funeral, I found his old journal, the one he kept meticulously updated after our return. The last entry, dated just days before he passed, was simply a single, familiar symbol drawn on the page. The Wayfinder symbol, except now, around it, were faint, malformed imprints, a tiny, almost invisible, extra toe at 60 now. My daily routine is tame compared to my former life. I'm quite content puttering around the house and tending my garden these days, the smell of fresh earth a grounding comfort. But some wild, wounded part of my spirit will always remain 16, crouched by a flickering campfire deep in those Alaskan woods, ready to battle monsters, haunted by the knowledge of what happened. Because I know now such evil does lurk in forgotten places. And sometimes it doesn't just kill you, it changes you. It leaves a mark, a silent knowing, a subtle shift in the soul, a peculiar calm that creeps in, that proves you were touched by something ancient and malevolent, something that might have let you go, not because it was merciful, but because it had already taken what it needed. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind howls just right, and I catch a faint, earthy scent, I find myself whispering about the ancient ones. And I feel that cold, malformed extra toe pressed against my own soul, a chilling, undeniable presence. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.